So I don't think that there's a peak to creativity. And I feel like when people say that there is, they're just like limiting themselves and like what they could learn and know.
Mitzi, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate your time to chat today. I mean, you come with some really incredible experience. You've worked with companies like HP, Netflix, and Spotify as an interaction and product designer. But you say you're an activist first and a designer second, which points to the incredible passion you have for community, inclusivity, and accessibility in the industry, which led you to, in 2020, co-found Where Are the Black Designers, a volunteer-run, non-profit design advocacy organisation that I admire very much. Can you tell me a bit more about the journey that you went on that year and what you wanted to achieve with the organisation?
Yeah, it was an interesting journey. I started off with frustration because with my first job, I wasn't feeling very like comfortable, very safe, and I think with the disillusionment that I got from graduating the design school that I went to and being convinced that, if you did A, B, and C, you should be able to navigate your career super easily. I was just feeling really frustrated because I was finding that it wasn't as easy as they were saying that it was. And I was kind of walking away from like a lot of interviews. Even though I was being told that the work was good, I was like walking away just really with the question in the back of my mind of, is this outcome happening because I'm Black, or is it happening because like maybe I actually don't have the skills? And I don't think that a lot of these statements that are at the bottom of applications saying that they don't discriminate was helpful. And so when George Floyd happened and all of these like horrendous Black squares were coming out with companies saying, "Oh, we support the Black community," I was kind of like, "You're lying." I'm like, "You're lying," but it's like not adding up. And even then, I was using my personal Instagram to go on company Instagrams and like ask, like, if this is true that you support the Black community, like, where's your demographic tracker? Like, where's the data that shows that, you do support Black community through like hiring Black folks, which essentially can keep them out of these like violent cycles that some people end up being at. And so when they were kind of giving me these like, excuse my French, but like bullshit answers of just like, "Oh, we worked on this project to, affect the school to prison pipeline. And, we've been working on diversity for a really long time." And some horrendous answers of just like, we just couldn't find Black people out there. I just kind of really like have enough. And, what was supposed to be like this small community discussion within my social circle just really spiraled into this big big community, like, viral conversation because I think that at the time with the pandemic as well, like, people just really wanted to know these answers, especially in combination with what was happening with George Floyd. So, yeah, that's kind of like my journey with that in a nutshell for sure.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And you've obviously taken some tough experiences of your own and made them into something really positive that I know has helped a lot of people and a lot of businesses as well. You mentioned there a demographic tracker, and you pointed as well at the fact that a lot of creative agencies can feel like they're helping an issue through obviously creativity and projects, which is great, but you also need to make a change in literally how you hire and how you support and how you advocate for people. What sort of basics should we all be implementing that perhaps are still being missed?
Yeah, I feel like that's a really good question that even I myself am thinking about, especially as someone who is leading this organization and is, hiring volunteers to do work for us. But I think I really reflect back on my experience with two people in my life, one that was my mentor and one that was my manager, if I can shout them out. But my first mentor, her name was Stephanie Mensorelli, and I feel like she was kind of like the first safe space that I had in my career as a mentor. I felt that she really not only took the time out of her busy schedule to just, like, sit down with me and help me navigate my career, but she really, like, listened to me and, like, made me feel very seen, and I felt like she really treated me as, like, a person without any, like, isms, not she wasn't treating me like I was too young, she wasn't treating me the way she treated me because I was Black. I just felt like she really saw me as, like, a person. And it's just, like, simple things like that. And even then, my manager at Spotify, his name's Akshan. Shout out to him because he was the only manager in, like, my little short design career that I also felt safe with, and he was the best manager of my entire career. But the thing that I loved about him was that, like, he was just, like, an advocate for me, and that he advocated for me and had my back in a way that was almost kind of like ride or die. So even if I was wrong, he still defended me. But then what we would talk about, like why I was wrong in our one-on-ones and not make it like as public. But I just remember that he just gave me freedom and space to do whatever I wanted to while also constantly looking for opportunities for me to grow, and even then, just allowing me to be vulnerable so that he could really understand how he could work for me to, like, grow. And I feel like it's just simple things like that, like having someone there for Black people to be heard and seen is just, like, the basis of what I feel like is really important in these, like, work environments. And just reflecting back on how they made me feel safe is just how I try to implement those practices and, like, what I do when it comes to the work with where the Black designers.
That's amazing. I think great mentorship and great management can really make or break your career and how you feel about it as well. So I'm pleased that you've had, really good mentors in that time. You spoke about opportunity there, and obviously, this conversation is based around the idea of age in design teams. So, have you seen race and age kind of intersect in shaping opportunities or challenges for Black creatives in the design industry?
Yeah, 100%. I think that, first there's, like, this weird shaping of opportunity that is kind of formed by, like, DEI and the whole, like, notion of the diversity hire. Like, I felt for a while, I probably say my last, like, couple of jobs, like, I was the diversity hire. And in ways, it's unfortunate to say that sometimes I let that define my mental state and let it get me down. And so I feel like sometimes it has shaped those opportunities in those kind of ways. And even then, for anyone who's listening that maybe feels that they're in that same position, I would say that it's like you don't want to let the whole concept of diversity hire like be your mindset. Like, you're just more than that. But even with age too, it's kind of like a double-edged sword because it's like I feel like what I've noticed with Black folks is that Black people are just kind of, like, infantilized, so it's like, I feel like that's why we see a lot of Black folks in just, like, lower positions rather than when you get higher, it's very rare, and so I feel like it's shaped those opportunities, but at the same time, with tokenization, it has allowed for space in the sense that, there's usually that Black person that's, like, the first and the only one, which can be good and is celebrated sometimes, even though I don't think that it should be. But at the same time, it's very lonely at the top, and I think that it has developed this toxic culture that because there is tokenization, it causes almost kind of like this Hunger Games-esque feeling when it comes to trying to attain an opportunity. Like, I remember applying to a job, and one of my other friends, she was applying to that same job, and I felt like there was this mentality that there was like, "Oh, there can only be one of us." So, I remember we both had this feeling that it was like, if I got hired or she got hired, there was only gonna be space for one of us. Like, it was just they weren't gonna
Wow.
take more than one. And so I feel like that's how it's kind of, like, shaped opportunities. I'm hoping, with all this work and even the grassroots organizations that are out there, that we are really moving the needle on basically not having that anymore, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. It really highlights then one of the stats that I learned on your website, which is that it's estimated that only 3% of designers are Black.
Mhm.
And so it makes sense what you're saying about people in more senior positions. Then, because of that stat, you're not going to see as many Black creatives in leadership positions,
Even
which is really difficult. But obviously, there's great value from the cultural and lived experiences of older Black creatives and
yeah,
what they bring to design teams.
yeah.
What is that value specifically, and how can younger designers and leaders better learn from those people?
Yeah, it's something that I've been thinking about because it's like we're in a very interesting circumstance right now, but it's like when I look towards Black elders, it's not anything new for them. Like, I think for a lot of us, it feels like the end of the world because it's kind of like we're seeing what we read in textbooks coming back up, but there are Black elders who have really like lived that. And I feel like in them living those experiences and even doing some of the same work that I've been doing, they have more of the answers than I think that I have or a lot of, famous and active communities have. And I think that they can provide historical solutions in like hindsight that we're just like not seeing because we weren't there for that. And so I feel like that's what they can bring to the table. And even with some of these designers having designed through like the civil rights movement, I think it's just interesting that, I think it's like I said, they really just have the solutions of how they design through these unethical times. And so I feel like we can really look towards them when it comes to true empathy and true sympathy because that fight for liberation and designing in that really touched like a lot of intersections and was very global. And so yeah, that's kind of like how I see it as pretty valuable.
It's a really wonderful point when you think about the strength that empathy has in creativity in general today, with obviously the rise of AI tools and that sort of thing. These kind of personal power skills are so important, and empathy is a huge one. And so to have older Black creatives that have that in abundance is a really powerful thing to have in leadership. So
Mhm,
let's talk about you personally then, and your experience of kind of how your age has impacted your career.
mhm.
Remind me, Mitzi, are you 20,
I'm
28?
29, I'm turning
29.
30. That's a good thing, but yeah.
It's a great age. It's a great age. Have you ever felt too old or too young for the job that you were doing at any time?
I've never felt too old. I think that sometimes I felt too young in the sense that I have let people make me feel too young, especially because it's like, I think genetically and physically, I present as younger than I actually am. Like, even in, just day to day interactions, I always have people asking me, like, oh, like, "What are you studying? Like, what school are you at?" And I know that they're referring to, like, undergraduate. I know they're not even referring to graduate. And so, I think in that treatment sometimes, I have felt like, "Oh, maybe I am too young." Like, and I have seen positions that I'm like, "Oh, I could be great for," because of the unconventional, experiences that I picked up with the Black centers that I could really bring this, like, amazing perspective. But I think that there is kind of like this prejudice that is put on some of these positions of like, oh, you kind of have to physically look like you've been through it for you to like be considered. And so I feel like I used to be a little bit discouraged, but then it's like I met some folks in London who are like a year younger than I am, and they're already on like Forbes 30 under 30, sitting on councils and stuff. And I look at that and I'm like, if they can do it, like I can totally do it too. Like it's not an age thing at all. And so, yeah, I never felt too old, but I definitely have felt too young sometimes. But I think those are just like my inner demons winning, I would say.
Well, you say inner demons, but it sounds like some of that has come from other people, and I think it's important to recognize that in terms of
Yeah.
how we, in even those tiny little micro interactions that you have with people. It's really important to recognize the way you're talking to people any older or any that younger than you that can make opinion feel invalid or any way, or like they're too young, even as a sort of compliment, you might think that you
Yeah.
seem really young. It's kind of can be a little bit damaging perhaps on your confidence and that sort of thing. So I think it's really important to recognize that it's both external and something that we all have within us a little bit as well.
Agree.
Um, do you think that there's kind of a peak age for working in creative roles today?
No, I feel like there's not. And I feel like when we say that there is, we are kind of bringing in ageism and applying creativity to that. And I feel like a lot of the most amazing people and most creative people that I know are older Black people. And I think what I admire about some of these older Black people that I love talking to, one of them who I'm going to shout out being Kevin Bethune and Raja Shah, is that like they are so open to learning from anyone. Doesn't matter who it is, doesn't matter what age they are. They have this just like curiosity and this space that they give to anybody that they're having a conversation with. And I think that because of that, like you just see that their creativity is endless because their curiosity is just like endless and they are open to learning and really being taught by anyone. So I don't think that there's a peak to creativity, and I feel like when people say that there is, they're just, like, limiting themselves and, like, what they could learn and know, and yeah.
That's a really great point, and it's interesting because I feel like curiosity keeps coming up as a really important trait for
Mhm.
designers, but interestingly, I don't feel it's something you can learn. It's just something that you have. What other sort of qualities or traits do you think that it takes to be a sort of true successful creative today?
That's such a good question that I feel like I'm still trying to answer myself as a creative that is still determining and defining what success to me looks like. But I think the biggest thing for me, and I think it goes back to the point that I was making, is just like empathy and sympathy are like really huge things for me because that's where I feel like learning opportunities grow is when you try to understand where someone is coming from. And so I feel like those are the two biggest things for me because I feel like when you limit yourself from that or, you use the whole you know, design thinking or ideo design way of design empathy, I think that you really just block yourself off to, again, just like creative opportunities. And even then, I think the other thing too is that I feel like contributes to being a successful creative is like learning how to work with like nothing. Almost like learning how to work with just like what the earth has given us. And I feel like that's why I look towards a lot of indigenous communities because like their creativity is really rooted in just like respecting where everything has come from, which is like nature, and I think that nature's just, like, so creative, and so I think respect for nature is, like, a huge thing for me in terms of being a really good creative.
I absolutely love that. I feel like I've said this to you before. Every time we speak, I get such great energy from you, and I think that's really inspired me actually to look again at nature because it's something that is highlighted as a guilty trait that people have is that you go back online to look at inspiration or you go
Yeah,
back to the same books or things that you like. Whereas if you have nothing, that's really a great challenge for a
yeah.
true creative. I really like that. If we zoom
Mm,
out a second and think about generational diversity as a
mhm.
whole, how do you think that impacts creative teams working and collaborating together?
I think that's a tricky one because it's like I feel like I've worked on relatively young teams, and I feel like I it's been rare for me to work with anyone past, like, I would say late 30s, like even 40s. And in a way, that's kind of like ageism itself. And so I think it's like the impact for that is really important. I believe in diversity of any kind, period. But I think that in not having that generational diversity, we are really kind of like cutting ourselves off to honestly just like a lot of communities. Because, for example, the disability community is like a community I really look towards and also look at their practices to try to implement in my work because I remember I saw this really good video that basically was making the point of the fact that like we're all disabled in a way, but even as we get older, it like gets worse. And so I think having that perspective, right, that I feel like is really left out because I feel like I work with like a spectrum of young people. I work with a spectrum of people anywhere from like just graduating college to like 40, but after that, I just don't see anybody. And so I feel like we're really just leaving out just kind of like this natural notion of just like aging and what's going to happen. And even then I see it in products that we make when we don't address like visual accessibility because it's like as we age our sight gets worse. And that's kind of like one of the things that usually gets sacrificed when it comes to like product equity. And I don't see advocates in the room or even just like elders from that range to just be like, no, this is really important because this is how it affects, my peers and whatnot. So I feel like that's kind of like my take from just like my experience and like what I've seen. But yeah, I unfortunately just don't see this like crazy impact of generational diversity because I think that it goes back to your point of like creative peaking. I think that we as a society have really not been good at like understanding that creative peaking essentially like affects ageism and like it affects like people of a certain age demographic.
Totally. I mean, the kind of length of service, in careers is only extending as life expectancy obviously gets longer,
Right.
and there's a higher retirement age. It means people are literally working for longer, and so if you take into account, education, which especially in America takes you to a little bit later, through to people working until they're maybe 75, actually that kind of almost drop-off rate we see of people in their 40s where they're less visible in the industry is way too early.
Yeah.
There doesn't seem to be space for people.
Yeah.
But, it's really interesting to look at that, plus a statistic I read about the other day, which is that the average age of a marketing manager is 39
Yeah.
versus other sort of more managerial roles being a little bit older, so it's like even the clients and the decision makers are getting younger,
Mhm.
so it's no wonder that in design agencies as well, there's this younger demographic to kind of meet those needs. So it's a really challenging time, but obviously it seems we can say that a lot of this influence comes from the leadership teams, of course, in businesses where they need to embrace older talent as well.
Mhm.
So I wanted to ask, how has your work leading Where Are the Black Designers really influenced your understanding of leadership in design spaces, and how have you seen how they prioritize inclusion and diversity?
Yeah, so I feel like where the Black designers, I think, again, just points back to all these points that I've been talking about, like empathy and creating safe spaces, because I think that being a Black person and being kind of like from a race where unfortunately a lot of the world's consequences falls on has like really shaped how I work with other Black people. And even then, I work with people like how I want to be worked with. And so that comes with, as a leader, making sure that you create a safe space. Like, I feel like leaders don't, from what I see, there's not this like accountability of creating safe spaces and listening to people that you're leading or managing. And for me, it's like I always put it on me to make sure that anybody anybody that I bring on to work with, they don't have to worry about anything except their work. They don't have to worry about just like how they present themselves. They don't have to worry about like getting something wrong. It's like I really try and make space for mistakes. I try and make space for time because in my journey of becoming truly me, I have come to realize that there's no such thing as a design emergency. I think that capitalism has created that. It's not a thing. No one's gonna die if you don't, submit this one thing. Worst case scenario, we extend a deadline and something just comes a little bit after. Time is just like completely, it's a concept. And so I make space for time. I make space for mistakes. I make space for people bringing their most authentic self. And I think that through that, I have really seen the effects of that. So it's like in us working with Black designers and creating such beautiful work, I've seen the impact that that beautiful work and setting up that space has had on some of these people's careers. Like there are people that we have worked with who have made something so beautiful because we have allowed them that space to go on and get their dream job, to win awards for the work that they've like done for us. And so to me, I'm like, "Oh, this is just a proof of concept that it's just like, if you are really just nice to people and you are there for them and you listen to them and you just do those simple things, like, you can make such amazing, powerful work." And I feel like that's just, like, what I wanna see more in the industry. Even when I was referring to, my first mentor and my manager that I mentioned, like, I really revisit that experience and always try to lead with that. And yeah, I just think that this whole authorization of, like, hierarchy and being at the top has, like, really made people think that it's like they don't have to do anything. When it's just like there's a lot of responsibility just, like, being a leader and guiding people and making them feel safe and whatnot so that they can, again, do their best work.
Some of the things you listed there make it sound easy and basic, which it is basic about listening and taking time with people and that sort of thing. But there's no denying that it is a tough time for a
Mhm.
lot of design businesses, especially the small ones that might be time poor, or struggling or trying obviously to make ends meet and that sort of thing.
Mm.
So, is there any really simple, practical things that people can be doing more of, that perhaps doesn't have to have the burden of too much time, that we can all learn from?
Honestly, I think the simple thing of just listening. There's just something about listening that just really keeps you up to date, makes people feel seen, makes people feel heard, that I think is very powerful. And I feel like that's what I have done. And even then, as someone who has built something from nothing, is still building something from nothing, the anecdotes that I get from people in terms of just like measuring the success of this community is just the fact that the reason why they love this space is because they feel seen and heard. And I feel like that's the simplest thing that I could do. And I feel like that's the simplest thing that I'm going to continue doing because it's working.
Yeah, I think it's something that can easily be lost. I think the design community is a wonderful, supportive, kind of vibrant place naturally
Mhm.
because of the type of people who are drawn to creativity, but it can be put to one side when you've got design emergencies
Yeah.
and pressure and deadlines
Yeah.
and all those sorts of things. So it really speaks to something that's already there. We just need to take more time,
Yeah.
or space to listen. So I really appreciate that. I mean, that's wonderful advice. I'd love to hear if there's any advice that you've got from someone of a different generation that's really
Mm.
stayed with you in your career.
Yeah. The one thing that has really guided me into being where I'm at today is from my parents. I think that they instilled this like quiet confidence in me of telling me that like the worst thing that anyone can do or say to you is say no or not respond. And that really, I always think about that. No matter what I do, no matter like what I want to achieve, I think about that specifically because I think what that does for me is it makes me look at people in higher positions and leadership positions and makes me understand that they're just human beings at the end of the day. Doesn't matter if anybody is president, CEO, VP, manager, associate product designer, or associate designer. that literally their position doesn't make, you know, them any better than you. You're not better than them. We're literally just like on the same plane of being human beings at the end of the day. So just like go for it, ask for what you want. And if it's a no or no response, just like keep it moving because that's like the worst thing that anyone can say to you.
And I think that really highlights as well the need for leaders and those super impressive job titles you just mentioned. They're people as well, and they need space to be listened to, and have that kind of safe space as well. And I think it's easy to forget as employees that that's something that's really important to those, running the businesses we work at as well.
Mhm.
So I think that's something that we can take away from this.
Yeah.
What what unique strengths do you think our generation bring to creative teams?
Oh, that's a good one. But the first one I think that comes to mind is just being so unserious. Like, I think, I think that is like the biggest unique strength is just having a PhD in clowning. And I think that it's like, I love working with people my age because of that, because we just don't take anything seriously. So it doesn't feel like this, again, this like design emergency. It just feels like this thing that we're, working on. We care about the users and customers and people and everything. But that's a superpower because I think that being unserious has a way to make people feel very comfortable and like really
Yeah.
break the ice to again bring their most authentic selves to the table and be okay with being vulnerable and open. And I think in being unserious, it's just like and just like having a laugh, like it really, I think, just brings down so many barriers where, like, people can just, again, come with their most authentic selves.
That's wonderful. I think it really speaks to the theme of playfulness that's so important in, like you say, that a safe space, allowing you to be truly creative, working from nothing. To have that attitude come into any room is a wonderful thing.
Mhm.
Is there any traits then from older people that you kind of you've missed out in your career? Because you mentioned that you really haven't worked with that many people over
Yeah.
40 in your team. So is there an element of seriousness
Mhm.
that should have been there in the room?
I think that what I've been missing that I feel like I get from elders that I talk to, but I wish I could work with, is I think this understanding that as human beings, we kind of work in patterns, like, everything is, like, cyclical. So it's just like everything that is usually happening now has already happened. I feel like I missed that hindsight because, again, sometimes it feels like the world is burning and it's up in flames, but then I go and talk to some of my elders and they're like, "Yeah, we lived the same thing before, but you just have to continue living and know that everything's gonna be fine." And so I think it's that hindsight that I feel like I'm missing in my career and teams that I've worked with that I would have loved, I think.
Even if it's just one voice in the room where it's like, "It's all gonna be okay.
Yeah.
You've seen these challenges before." In your view, what does a truly inclusive and accessible future look like for design? And how can creative businesses really work towards that vision?
I think for me, it looks like a place where any minority can go and, like, not have that question in the back of their head on, like, if this happened because of their differences or if it happened because they're really good at what they do. Like, for me, that's, like, a measure of success. And I feel like I can give the whole, easy answer of just like, "Oh, we can make it more inclusive by hiring more diversity and whatnot," but there's just, like, a lot to go into that I think that I have mentioned where it comes to, creating a safe space, listening, even then just, like, hiring practices. I'm not gonna lie, I feel like these interviews are just horrendous, and we need to, like, do better and have better practices in understanding how people think and whether or not that is something that they want to bring people onto their team for. There's just, like, so many things I think that I think also to add to the more inclusive sustainable and accessible future, I think there's a lot of things that we need to normalize as human beings. Like, I think we need to normalize our more complex negative emotions. That being said, like, I feel like LinkedIn is this like toxic positive place where we can't talk about a lot of our terrible experiences that we have gone through, and I feel like that feedback is really important to, like, help companies understand, like, what more to do, but we just don't do that because and we enable that because it's like we go on LinkedIn and we get laid off and we're like, "Oh my god, like, I had such a great time at this company." And it's like, "No, you didn't. They laid you off." Like, tell us, like, how you truly, truly feel, like, just having those points of just, like, feedback is really important because I also think that stops people from falling into toxic places, but, yeah, I guess what I'm just saying is just, like, points of feedback to contribute to that kind of future, I feel like is really, really important, besides the basic, hiring more diverse, teams and hiring from different communities and listing and whatnot, but, that's kind of how I feel.
That's super powerful. Thank you. I think that, like you say, talking more openly, it's not just those kind of final measures that by which we can measure how sort of accessible and inclusive we're all being, but actually how much we talk about the issues and how much change we make as well. And I know that you are making so much change for people and for businesses. You and the team, Where Are the Black Designers? So I'm really interested to continue learning from you, especially with your event that's happening this summer. I can't wait.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
we're
I
always
really appreciate your input and your knowledge and your positivity on these difficult challenges and your advice about how we face into them and make change. So thank you so much.
No, of course, thank you so much.